Without further ado, I'd like to welcome David to the stage, David Bluhm.
Thank you. So it's about 2002, some 14 years ago, and this business looked a lot different back then. If you recall at that point, we were just getting into some reasonable applications on the phone. We had just been given a file system, some memory to work with, a billing system through the wireless carriers, wireless operators. And the critical success factor back then was being on the deck. You had their idea of an app store, if you can call it that back then. And if you got their promotion, their listing on the App Store, you had a reasonable chance to create some download traffic. Everything was premium. You had built-in price points you could take advantage of, typically $3.99, $5.99, $7.99. And we were all desperate to come up with that app that they would list on the deck and promote us, and that allowed you to build a business. And there wasn't the kind of money that there's in the App Store today. We all split up a much smaller bucket of money, but you worked very hard. And so, as you can imagine, brands, titles had great meaning, and the business revolved around getting a brand. There was very few new brands created. So in all our cleverness, we tried to cover every brand category you possibly could. If they wanted a football app, you'd want to go with the NFL. If they wanted a basketball app, you'd get a famous star, you'd get the NBA. So there was a couple people standing after that early mobile application environment was created. It very much like today, it started to mature, and there was a few people that had distribution. There was a lot of people who didn't. We were one of them at the company Chris mentioned, Hands On Mobile. Back then it was called M-Forma. And so we worked very closely with the carriers. This story's going someplace relevant, guaranteed. And we split up all those spots on the deck between us and Jamdat, probably the two largest distributors, especially in North America, Europe. We owned most of those slots. Our games, our apps filled most of those slots. So when the carrier came up with a new idea, we both scrambled to be the first to get that new slot to increase our distribution. So both Singular and AT&T, which at that point we were talking about a merger, but this was pre-merger days, decided that this women's volleyball thing was a big trending thing. Seemed like it was a great area to explore for an app. So we immediately got on it and said, we're going to go win that slot. We're going to create the right app, and we're going to have the right brand so that we win that slot. So we got on a plane, we went to Chicago, where the American Volleyball Professional Association is headquartered. We quickly convinced them mobile was a big thing. We were the guys to help them, and we signed a deal. We proudly went back to Singular and were prepared to inform them that we had won the big brand and that they would, give us that slot. No, not sure we like your game. We're going with Jamdat. They have Baywatch volleyball. Therein lies a lesson. We got beat badly. We got beat creatively. We got beat in many ways. And therein lies the challenge I would give you today. Let's see if we can't get these slides going here. The challenge of today is that brands are, in fact, are we going someplace? Let's see. There we go. The challenge we have today, this is really slow, so I may have really cranked it up here. Am I doing this wrong? Oh, there we go. It's just slow, I guess. All right, so the challenge we have today is that we see a brand and we want to take advantage of it. And what is a brand? A brand is, by definition, if you're a marketing person, the value of promise delivered, right? The promise of value delivered, sorry. It's got an expected value. It's got an expected proposition to the consumer. They expect that. They've come to understand it, to believe in it, to be loyal to it. And when you bring it to a new medium, a new product, a new service, they expect to live it, okay? But in the mobile gaming world, in any gaming world, that comes with some advantages, at least that we think of in our mind. First of all, downloads. We think we're going to get more people select something because of their familiarity. That's a clean economics, and we'll get back to that in a second. We think it's going to bring some loyalty, okay? And that transfers into brand advocacy. We think that that brand is going to help us with the balance of the consumer audience and help find us new customers that are loyal, that are willing to immerse themselves into this game, and ultimately pay and become really responsible. So you're trying to take that advocacy to a bigger mobile audience and find it. Aha, but there's some challenges. And this is the way you can dissect good brand strategy, good PC titles to mobile, and ones that don't execute as well. And these are all lessons learned the hard way, which I will be very self-transparent about. So the first speed bump along the way is you're going to possibly change the game in its structure from what people loved and became advocates for, because that's a necessary change to make in terms of mobile consumption. People play mobile games differently. We can talk about shorter game sessions. We can talk about what games they like to play, how today it's becoming more about the metagame, more about clans, groups, factions of players that play together and socialize while they play a game, or it gets played in large ways for them and underneath their attention. And then you change the monetization to fit the mobile audience, the mobile, and this is all very straightforward and basic. The problem you run into here is that when you do those things, your advocacy could significantly shrink. So these are the tensions that you're playing with when you're evaluating a PC game that's been successful, but you know you have to change it to free to play. You know you have to change it to something that might be an RPG for a certain mobile audience, or some other mechanic that's going to play better on mobile and find that mobile consumer. And you may lose that advocacy, you may lose that connection to the brand when you try and transfer that game to mobile. So with that context in mind, let's talk about a few specific examples. And I'm going to be really simple and short here and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not trying to pick on anybody here. Some of the numbers I put up here are equally as inaccurate. In other words, they basically come from App Annie, so their accuracy is equally inaccurate across the board. But I'm also going to be self-effacing because some of these examples are very near and dear to our heart. So my definitions are: the good, obviously, is you've taken a brand, you've enhanced it, you've found a bigger audience, you've made money, life is good, you've done the brand well, you've done your business well. But there's other ways to take a brand to mobile that don't work out so well. It could, in fact, do wonders for the brand. It could extend the brand in a really meaningful and quality way, but not make money. So you haven't helped yourself, but you've certainly extended the brand and made it a little stronger. And then there's the ugly, which I'm going to back out the finances. You've diminished the brand. You've heard it for yourself, you've heard it for the brand owner, you've heard it for other franchise properties that might be built around it. So starting with the good. We're all familiar with Hearthstone. It's done a couple things, I think, cleverly, whether it was on purpose. Now, Hearthstone took, we all know how long it took to make, how expensive it was, who knows how many, turns and twists it took. But if you look at what it did on mobile, everybody would have to consider it a fantastic result. They did something pretty clever here. Remember, they had to change the game mechanics. They had to change the monetization system from something that people were endeared to. So they did this with the big risk factor that they had to decide through and execute through, which is pretty impressive, okay? But they did something beyond taking a brand to mobile. They took a World of Warcraft brand, Heroes of Warcraft, they galvanized that group, they became strong advocates for this game, and they found something bigger and broader on mobile at the same time, which is very hard to do. So when they captured their audience, they actually broadened it to a pent-up demand of CCG games that hadn't been done well on mobile. And other people have tried to follow, ourselves included, without anywhere near that level of success, okay? So let's talk about another game that took no risk in terms of taking the game from its success on PC. It's a PC title that has 153, I guess that's an old number, months behind, but yeah, we've got well over 150 million registered users on World of Tanks worldwide. This game is a mature game. It's been out and what is it, in the 7th year now? And it's certainly declining in certain geographic regions, but it's growing in other ones, namely the ones we care about in mobile, North America, APAC, and has a healthy upside to it, largely because it's being pushed to Xbox One, Xbox 360, Sony PlayStation. So we took a game and we pushed it straight to mobile at Wargaming without changing the game mechanics. Yes, we had to map the controls to a touch screen, and that's probably the biggest risk that game has taken, because other than that, it's playing the same game on a tablet. I'll tell you one thing unique about this game is it has more downloads on iPads than on phones. I don't know how many games you can say that's true about. Given that iPads represent whatever, 25, 27% of the total mobile market, I should say tablets, the fact that it has more downloads on iPad is pretty unique, which is its playability on an iPad is so much better than on a phone. Trying to create all that map and strategy on an iPhone is very challenging. But they took no risk on game design. It's exactly the same game. They took no risk on monetization. It's exactly the same monetization, tank progression, which is very hard to make work on mobile as a successful. So they did a fantastic job, and they leveraged a strong localized marketing effort. Wargaming has street teams, feet on the street, if you will, in 15 different countries, and has so much experience managing World of Tanks PC to success that we've been able to leverage, even if we're not the best executors on mobile yet. Just having those resources and showing up, we've done a fantastic job. So it's been a very successful game, but it remains very strong and has been very steady for us. But the key there was taking no risk on trying to change its mechanics or its monetization. So we get into the bad. This is another, many of the people that joined WG Labs have former careers at PopCap local in Seattle, and understand this very well because they were in charge of taking the first free-to-play version of Plants vs. Zombies to market. This is a highly performing IP. It's a world IP. It was a massive IP, a very valuable IP, still is. But when they took it free to play, it didn't have the advocacy of its current players. It fought with its current loyalists around the brand. It still did well by any of our, I think, definitions, but not in the definition of this world-class IP, what it meant to EA as a new owner. We remember how long it took to build this game, how much anticipation came out, and then the users were quite irked and quite frustrated. Once it did come out, becoming a free-to-play game, that was part of the brand value, of the promise of value delivered for the player of Plants vs. Zombies traditionally, and they didn't buy into the free-to-play nature of that game. So it's something you have to look at. So another personal example, we took a game, and this is a very niche game that didn't have a big footprint, didn't have a worldwide audience, but had a loyal group of followers, was well liked and appreciated and admired and respected as a game called Card Hunter, developed by John Shea and Richard Garfield and our own Joe McDonough. A very geeky, hardcore kind of game, but the game itself on PC had no pathing. It was an exploratory wandering game, so you really couldn't measure a player's track or path through the game. You couldn't decide whether they were falling out or re-engaging. It really wasn't a free-to-play game. It kind of was, but you bought a club membership for $30, and that's what 80% of all players did. So it really acted like a premium game, even though it kind of advertised itself as a free-to-play game. We launched it just on iPads. It was an experimental game for us to get our feet on the ground and run and start building studio muscles and operations execution. But even then, it had disappointing results. We didn't find a mobile audience that grew like Hearthstone did. We didn't find a loyal player base that helped advocate for this game at all. It pretty much died with a bunch of awards. And the Card Hunter contingency objected that it even went to free to play. We moved their cheese on them. Not that they were a big enough group to worry about, but this is a game that didn't find and didn't execute like Hearthstone did, and find a bigger audience in the CCG genre on mobile. So finally, the ugly. I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but I think most of us are familiar with a game like Dungeon Keeper that had such high respect and admiration, and goes to mobile, and but it really hurt the brand. It hurt the overall ability to build a franchise across mobile. And don't want to say too much here, but I think we're kind of comfortable with taking a brand and executing on it well, so that you've actually hurt the brand's ability to execute further. And this happens every day. Probably unfair to pick on this one game. So the core of the discussion, and then we can answer some questions here. This is the last slide. We all know that brands are establishing themselves. If you don't, by the way, this is something I say to every conference I go to. If you're learning a lot at this conference, you're in trouble. Okay, I'd say that about me, anybody else. This is a hard game. This is a hard industry right now. It's never been more open. It's never been bigger. It's never been more with more upside, but it's never been harder to break through. It's never been harder to drive a game to the top and build a scalable business. This is still a wonderful business if you're going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 guys in a garage, spare bedroom somewhere. But if you're trying to build a scalable business from scratch, it's never been harder. It's gotten mature, and that's why brands are starting to really establish themselves. So we're trying to develop our own methods of evaluating a brand for a mobile game, whether it's a PC title, a TV show, a movie, theatrical. You've seen some news this week about some big theatricals being signed, TV shows coming. More and more brands are coming. More and more are doing well. More and more are breaking through with the consumer. And we're getting back to more of a mature publishing market where you'd see that be the case. So you certainly can look at Facebook and see how many likes a brand has. We like to look at its engagement. If I post something, how many people like that? How many people respond, repost that? It's important to see just its activity level, not just its total followership, which might be quite old. And like number of registered game players, they might be inactive, right? So you really try and look at how active and engaged are the people following this brand on Facebook, okay? Probably pretty obvious. Same thing with Twitter. You can see how many followers, you can see how many retweets, but you want to see what is the activity level. If something fresh gets tweeted, you want to know how many people interact with that, engage with that, and do something to forward that. And really not just look at followership, but engagement in these models. So now we have this new concept where people can stream your gameplay and people can watch it. And so there's a good way to find out, is it going to have a big footprint in this area? Are we designing the type of game? And I'm skipping over the notion of matching the IP with the right game genre, the right mechanics. But certainly you'd have to look at biasing yourself towards the mechanics that show well on a streaming strategy, because this is one of the potential disruptions that could come along and help us find discovery by people watching gameplay and even pseudo participation modes in terms of the streaming strategies. So, but we have other things we can look at. Obviously, we're stuck with, and I say that accurately, we're stuck with the ad network in terms of trying to acquire new users. And we're stuck with those economics, and we complain about them and we frustrate with them, and they are very limiting and they keep a lot of creativity from coming to market. But right now it's the game we play. So we have to think about those ad networks and how this game, this brand would play in that type of a environment, and how much lift we're going to get from this brand or title in an ad network execution. And that's certainly an important part of your evaluation, okay? But it gets interesting from there. These still have impact. Their impact is less. We just launched a game last Thursday. It's featured on Apple, main page, games carousel. But I can guarantee you the amount of downloads you're getting right now aren't what they used to be from an Apple feature. They don't have the impact they used to. This has been happening, and it just gets less and less and less. It's a noisier world. They split the the promotions across more games. They're actively, as you know, changing the game promotion layouts and moving you around during the week to train people to come back, not just on Thursdays in the case of Apple. So these features don't have the impact, but you still have to think them through in terms of, is this brand or title going to give you some organic lift through excitement building with the App Store owners. And that's obvious. We're still in the obvious zone here. A lot of games can either be tested or you can walk through their performance on Steam because they may already exist. If we're talking about PC titles coming to mobile, then you're going to go park on Steam and try and find out what that title has done and get a look at what it did. You can look at some of these brands have been kickstarted, and finding that initial excitement user base that wrapped their loyalty around that game even in a Kickstarter mode before it was even built is a useful, and probably should be one of the logos up here. But then how it did in early access and how people responded to it, and reading through all those reviews and comments and forums and blogs gives you a wealth of context, a wealth of qualitative understanding of a brand's potential on mobile. And so I would encourage you to really dive into all the things you can learn free and very quickly by parking on Steam and understanding what's gone there. Anybody ever heard of a QScore? Wow. I'm kind of impressed that there's one. I ran a QScore 4 years ago for a game we were contemplating. It was a racing game, and it was kind of in between Mario Kart and real racing. Just we were trying to find that niche in between, blow all the physics up, and in fact it was built right here in Vancouver, and something that we're just not prepared to queue up to compete with in terms of real racing, and just a really high-end game. So I was looking for an unfair advantage 4 years ago and trying to get a brand behind it, and through a personal relationship we had interest from Mazda, who was trying to get into the racing industry as a real player versus Ferrari and Porsche and Audi. And they wanted to sponsor the game. Their driving team was headed up by Patrick Dempsey, which is Dr. McDreamy on Grey's Anatomy, filmed right here in Vancouver. And he's a very famous actor and well-loved by mature women. So to prove it to Mazda that this was not going to be a good deal for me, I ran a QScore. Now QScore, to explain it, Hollywood casts movies. They're very shrewd about how they cast movies. They want to make sure that cast brings in every age group, every demographic, male and female, so they get the broadest audience. So if they're going to put Chris Pine as the lead, they might want to put a female actress that's going to complement Chris Pine in terms of their demographic reach. So you call up, one company does this. They do it custom. You tell them the demographics, the age, the male, female, and you ask them for a Q-score on that actor. And they give you a score. And the score could be high or low or whatever. And it helps inform you that you're getting the right demographics at the box office based on casting a movie properly. These Q-scores change daily. If you get a DUI, pulled over Highway 101, it gets reported in Hollywood Reporter, your Q-score goes down. If TMZ is there, it probably goes down a lot, as in the case of Mel Gibson. These Q-scores can fluctuate, and they go up and down based on your last movie, your last performance on Jimmy Fallon's show, what have you. So the idea here is to get to I'm not saying there's such a thing as a Q-score for a brand on mobile games, but that's what we want to get to. That's what we want to drive to. We want to get more scientific about understanding the quantification of a brand with respect to all these realities, distribution, ecosystem realities that we have to deal with. So measuring a brand's reach against a mobile demographic that matches your game and your game design is a really important process. And then finally, 3 of the 4 biggest mobile markets are not in North America. They're in APAC. So you have to understand your brand's reach over there. And that's one of the questions for the panel, I know, this afternoon. And that's an important consideration is, does this brand give me some advantage for APAC? And that's going to become more and more and more important every day as those markets continue to grow and become a bigger part of the food chain. So with that said, that would be my pointers as to how you evaluate a brand. Questions?
Cool. We got questions? We got time for maybe 1 or 2. We're running a bit late. We started a bit late. That's great. One or two questions? Come on.
Here.
There's a man in the front there.
For the good, bad, and ugly one, I feel it's more of the failure of the monetization system and the gameplay together, rather than the brand strategy. The game design and the monetization need to be compatible and basically working well with together. If the monetization is not good, but the gameplay is good, the game will be okay, but it just doesn't make money. If both are bad, then it will become the ugly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's kind of table stakes for what we've all signed up for here. We have to make a good game, and part of that is a good monetization, and it's married well with the mechanics, and it all works together. Absolutely.